Rosemary Thorne woke before sunrise to the sound of someone driving iron into the ground. 3 blows, a pause, 3 more. She lay still beneath the thin sheet, listening until she was certain it was not a loose shutter or a horse kicking a stall. The rhythm came from the north end of the ranch, near the dry wash and the 3 cottonwoods that leaned over the only dependable well for miles. She sat up. The room was already warm. Night had barely loosened its grip on the Gila Valley. Yet the adobe walls held yesterday's heat like a stove that had never gone cold. Rosemary reached for the clay pitcher beside her bed and knew by its weight how bad the morning was going to be. She poured half a cup. The water came out cloudy from the barrel sediment, with a faint woody smell. She drank only enough to wet her mouth. Then the hammering started again. On the dresser stood a photograph of Elias in a dark coat, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his expression too serious for a man who had laughed as often as he had. Rosemary looked at it while buttoning her work shirt. 5 years had passed since she buried him beneath the cottonwoods beyond the barn. Some mornings, the house still felt arranged around the space where he should have been. This morning there was no room for grief. She pulled on her boots, tied back her hair, and crossed the kitchen. The stove was cold. A heel of bread sat beneath a cloth. She left it there. When she stepped onto the porch, the smell of split cedar reached her before the men came fully into view. A wagon stood near the well, loaded with posts and coils of new barbed wire. 3 laborers were setting a line across the north pasture. The posts did not follow the old boundary markers. They cut inward toward the well house. Rosemary walked down the steps. Her mare Belle lifted her head from the corral and gave a low, unhappy nicker. The trough in front of her was nearly dry. Rosemary had planned to fill it before dawn, but she had stretched the last barrel through the night to give the younger stock a little more. The men kept working as she approached. Bart Rollins was supervising. Rosemary knew him from town. He was broad through the shoulders, heavy in the neck, and usually carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knew other people were expected to move out of his way. His shirt was dark with sweat between the shoulder blades. A Winchester lay against the wagon wheel. He saw her and did not stop. "Bart," he pushed another cedar post upright. "That line is on my property." Bart glanced toward the survey stakes, then back at the hole in front of him. "Mr. Vance says otherwise. He can say the moon belongs to him. Doesn't make it so." One of the workers slowed. Bart gave him a look, and the man resumed tamping dirt. Rosemary came closer. "You're fencing off my well." Bart wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "New survey puts the boundary 6 feet south of the old creek line. The creek moved in the flood 12 years ago. That's what the surveyor accounted for. My deed uses the stone markers, not the creek bed." Bart shrugged. "Take it up with Vance." Rosemary looked toward the well. The hand pump, weathered roof, and rough stone curb were all familiar enough that seeing men treat them as someone else's property gave the scene a strange, unreal quality. Elias had rebuilt that pump twice. Rosemary had replaced the leather seal herself the previous spring. There were grooves on the handle from their hands. "You finish this fence," she said. "My horses have no water." Bart's expression changed slightly. Not sympathy exactly. Recognition. "I'm doing a job, Rose. So was the undertaker when he buried my husband. He still knew whose grave it was." That landed. Bart's jaw tightened. He picked up the post hole bar again. "I don't want trouble. Then don't build it." He looked at her at last. "Vance owns most of the North Range now. He bought the Jenkins place, the Miller parcel, the old stage pasture. He's consolidating water rights. Says it's the only way cattle survive this drought. My cattle seem to be the exception." Bart said nothing. Rosemary followed his gaze to the wagon. There were enough coils of wire to close the entire well enclosure by noon. She turned and walked back to the house. Behind her, the hammering resumed. By 9, the fence had 3 strands. By 11, Bart had put a man with a rifle beneath the cottonwoods. At noon, Silas Vance arrived in a black carriage. Rosemary watched from the shade of the porch as he stepped down without hurry. Vance owned nearly 20,000 acres in the valley, and talked as though God had merely been the first title holder. He was in his early 50s, silver beginning at his temples, broad-shouldered without ever appearing to have done heavy work. Even in the heat he wore a dark vest and a pale linen shirt fastened neatly at the throat. He removed his gloves finger by finger as he approached. "Mrs. Thorne, Silas. I had hoped Bart would explain matters without upsetting you. He explained that you hired men to steal my water before breakfast." Vance sighed. as though she had made the conversation less civilized than he intended. He took a folded packet from inside his coat. There was a resurvey after the county records were reorganized. Your northern line was never properly reconciled with the post-flood channel. My northern line is marked by stone. Stone can be moved, so can surveyors. A small smile touched his mouth. I understand your suspicion. No, you understand my well. Vance looked past her toward the corral. Belle stood with her head low. 2 steers crowded the shaded side of the fence, flicking their tails at flies. The drought will break weak operations, he said. That is not cruelty, it is arithmetic. Rosemary folded her arms. My husband called men like you arithmetic with boots. For the first time, Vance's pleasant expression thinned. He also left you a ranch with debt, failing pasture, and limited capital. He left me a home. A home is only useful if one can afford to keep it. He placed the papers on the porch rail. I'm offering to buy the entire property. Cash. You can be in Tucson within a week. You could live comfortably. Rosemary did not touch the packet. How much? Vance named the figure. She laughed once. Not because it was funny. That wouldn't replace the barn. It is more than the ranch will be worth after another month without rain. You made sure of that. I made sure my own herds have water. There is a difference. You fenced my well. According to the survey, my well. She looked at him for several seconds. What happens if I refuse? Vance's eyes moved to the water barrels beneath the eaves. He did not need to answer. Rosemary felt anger rise, but beneath it sat something colder. Vance had not come to persuade her. He had come to let the heat finish his argument. He picked up the papers and placed them closer to the door. Think about it. I already have. People change their minds when circumstances change. My circumstances changed when Elias died. I stayed. Vance put on his gloves. This is survival. He turned toward his carriage. Rosemary called after him. Silas. He stopped. When this is over, I'm going to remember exactly who stood where. Vance looked back, faintly amused. Memory is a poor substitute for title, Mrs. Thorne. He climbed into the carriage and left. That afternoon, Rosemary measured the rain barrels. She used an old hickory stick with shallow notches carved along one side. Her father had made it years before, back when she was still Rosemary Hale and believed a dry summer was something that happened to other people. The first barrel held less than 4 inches. The second held 2. The third gave her the hollow knock of wood against wood. The fourth had enough to fill a cooking pot. She sat back on her heels. 4 days, perhaps, if she watered the animals first and herself last. 3 if the heat worsened. 2 if anything went wrong. She went to the corral and stood beside Belle. The mare pressed her forehead against Rosemary's shoulder. Her coat smelled of dust, sweat, and sun-heated hide. I know, Rosemary murmured. She poured a half bucket into the trough. The horses crowded forward. Rosemary stepped out of the way and watched them drink. She had spent years learning that need had its own sound. Hungry calves bawled. Hurt horses blew hard through their nostrils. A frightened child cried. Thirst made animals quiet. That frightened her more. The next morning she rode into Gila Flats. Belle moved slowly. Rosemary carried her last full canteen beneath the saddle flap where the sun would not heat it as quickly. She did not drink during the first hour. The town appeared through the pale shimmer of dust near midday. Gila Flats was no more than 2 streets of sun-bleached storefronts, a blacksmith shed, a church, a stable, 3 saloons, and an office where the local sheriff spent most afternoons avoiding work. Rosemary tied Belle in the narrow shade beside the sheriff's building. Inside, Sheriff Amos Reddick sat behind his desk, trimming a broken fingernail with a pocket knife. He looked up only after Rosemary had been standing there long enough to make ignoring her absurd. Rose. Vance fenced my well. I heard there was a line dispute. There is no dispute. There's a fence. Reddick set the knife down. Silas brought the survey in yesterday. Of course he did. Shows the well on his side. My deed doesn't. He says yours is outdated. It is the deed the county accepted for 20 years. Reddick rubbed the bridge of his nose. Rose, this is civil. My animals will be dead before a circuit judge comes through. I can't arrest a man because 2 maps disagree. You can tell his armed guards to stop threatening me. Did they fire on you? No. Point a gun at you? Not yet. Reddick spread his hands. Then what do you want me to do? She stared at him. He knew. That was the worst part. He knew exactly what Vance was doing. Come look at the line. I've seen the survey. Come look at the land. Reddick's face hardened. Don't make this harder than it already is. For who? He did not answer. Rosemary turned and left. At the general store, The bell above the door gave a bright little ring that made her want to tear it down. The shop was cool compared with the street. Sacks of flour and beans were stacked against one wall. Salt pork hung behind the counter. A glass jar of drinking water sat near the ledger, condensation sliding down its side. The sight of it made her throat contract. Edwin Pike, the shopkeeper, had known Elias nearly 20 years. He did not smile. "Need grain," Rosemary said, "and 2 gallons of water." Pike's fingers stayed on the ledger. "Price changed. How much?" he told her. She thought she had misheard. "That's 3 times last week. Vance bought the spring contracts." So he sets the wholesale price. You've got a town pump. Pump's low. Council voted rationing. Rosemary placed coins on the counter. "This is enough at last week's price." "It isn't last week." Pike looked ashamed, but he did not move. Rosemary's eyes dropped to the water jar. Pike reached over and pulled it farther from the edge of the counter. That small movement did more than any insult could have. She picked up her coins. "Rose, don't. I've got a business. So do I. If I cross Vance, you don't have to explain. I'm sorry." She put the coins back in her pocket. "No, you're afraid. That's different. Outside." The heat struck her face so hard she stopped beneath the awning. Across the street, 2 men she knew glanced away. No one came over. By the time she mounted Belle, Rosemary understood that Vance had done more than fence a well. He had made helping her expensive. The ride home took twice as long. Near sunset, she saw a rider high on the western ridge, only a silhouette. The rider remained still while she passed below. Rosemary watched for a moment, then continued home. That night, Belle would not eat. Rosemary sat in the kitchen with the lamp turned low. Wire cutters lay on the table. The house made its ordinary sounds. Wood contracting, mice scratching behind the pantry wall, the faint rattle of the loose chimney plate when wind passed over the roof. From the north pasture came another sound, the pump. Vance's men had attached a steam rig that afternoon and were drawing water into a holding tank on his side of the fence. The machine worked in steady breaths, thump, hiss, thump, hiss. Rosemary looked at the cutters. At midnight, she picked them up. She crossed the yard in darkness, keeping to the low ground behind the mesquite. The moon was thin but bright enough to silver the wire. No lanterns burned near the well. Rosemary crouched beside the fence. She slid the cutter jaws around the bottom strand. A rifle lever clicked behind her. She closed her eyes once, then stood. Bart Rollins came from behind a mesquite trunk Winchester held across his body. A second man remained farther back. "Put the cutters down, Rose." "No, don't be foolish. My horses are dying." Vance said no one crosses. "That includes me on my own land? You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean." Bart lowered the rifle slightly, but not enough. "Go home." She looked past him at the well house. The damp smell of cold stone reached her through the warm night air. It was close enough to make her body ache. "I need 2 buckets." "Can't, you won't." "That too." Rosemary took 1 step toward the wire. Bart's rifle came up. He did not point it at her chest. He aimed at the dirt beside her boot. The message was clear. She looked at him. "What are you being paid?" "Enough. For this?" His mouth tightened. "Go home, Rose." She stood there until the wire cutters grew heavy in her hand. Then she backed away. Bart did not laugh. That almost made it worse. Rosemary returned to the kitchen and sat beside the dark window until dawn. On the 3rd day, one of the calves went down. She found it in the shade of the barn, legs folded wrong beneath its body, tongue pale at the edge of its mouth. Rosemary carried water from the kitchen in a jar and poured a little at a time between its lips. The calf swallowed twice and turned its head away. She stayed beside it until the breathing eased. Then she heard the pump across the pasture. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. Something inside her broke cleanly. She walked out behind the house, crossed the dry garden, and reached the rosebush Elias had planted the year they married. Most of it was dead. 1 red bud remained, curled tight against the heat. Rosemary touched it. The petals came apart against her fingers. She sat in the dirt with the dry red pieces in her palm. For the first time since the fence went up, she allowed herself to cry. No tears came. Her body had nothing to spare. She stayed there until the sun lowered. When she tried to stand, the yard tilted. Rosemary caught the garden post, missed it, and went down on 1 knee. The ground smelled of hot mineral dust. She crawled toward the porch, made it halfway, and stopped. A shadow fell across her. At first, she thought it was a cloud. Then someone knelt beside her. She knew the man before he spoke. Kiona Swiftwater had guided army patrols through the high country years earlier, then quit after a lieutenant ignored his warning and lost 3 men in a flash flood. Since then, he appeared in town rarely. People called him an Apache scout because they needed a simple name for a man they did not understand. Rosemary had met him twice through Elias. Once at the ranch. Once at a funeral. He wore a faded buckskin shirt, dark trousers, and a hat that had lost its original shape. Dust coated his boots and the lower half of his leggings. His hair was tied at the nape. He set down his canteen but did not offer it immediately. Instead, he opened a pouch and placed a wad of damp green moss in her palm. Rosemary stared at it. Where did you get this? Shade Spring. There's no spring near here, not near the road. He pointed to her mouth. Hold it against your tongue. I need water. You need not to be sick. She did as he said. The moss was cold. The shock of moisture was so intense she almost swallowed it whole. Kiona touched 2 fingers to her wrist, watching her pulse. After a minute, he gave her one small sip from the canteen, then another. He waited. Rosemary leaned against the porch step. How long have you been watching? Kiona looked toward the northern ridge. Long enough. You saw the fence. Yes. You saw me go to town. Yes. And you waited until I fell down? He glanced at her. I waited until you stopped trying to solve it alone. She might have been angry if she had more strength. Instead, she laughed weakly. That sounds like something Elias would say. Kiona's expression shifted at the name. He listened. Sometimes. He listened to land better than most. He still dug in the wrong place first. Because a surveyor told him to. Rosemary looked at him. The pump worked steadily in the distance. What do you know? Kiona sat on the lower step. For a while, he said nothing. Then he took a short stick and drew a line through the dust. This valley holds an underriver. Rosemary rubbed her thumb across the damp moss in her palm. An aquifer. That is one word. He drew a mountain ridge, then several crooked lines beneath it. Snow and rain enter the rock here. Water travels beneath basalt and limestone. It comes up where the stone breaks. He marked the location of her well. Here. Rosemary leaned closer, then Vance can pump it dry, not all of it. But he can lower the shallow water, kill seeps, starve wells. Why would he? To make smaller ranches sell. The answer was obvious enough that Rosemary felt foolish for asking. Kiona drew another mark farther north, across San Pedro Mission. Rosemary knew the ruins. Everyone did. They lay beyond Devil's Backbone in country most people avoided during summer. What does that have to do with my well? Kiona wiped his fingers on his trousers. My grandmother carried a story from her grandmother. When the priests built San Pedro, they could not survive the first dry season. Apache families showed them hidden water. Later there was an agreement. Shared pasture, shared wells. The priests wrote it down. Where? At the mission. Rosemary stared at him. That place burned before my mother was born. Part of it. Paper doesn't survive fire. Some did. How do you know? Kiona reached beneath his shirt and withdrew a small tarnished locket hanging from a strip of sinew. He opened his hand. The locket was oval, blackened around one edge. My grandmother found this when she was a girl. Her mother told her where it came from. Rosemary took it carefully. Inside, behind a cracked miniature portrait, a folded scrap of vellum had been pressed flat. She looked up. Kiona nodded toward the house. Needle. They sat at the kitchen table beneath the low flame of the lamp. Rosemary used her finest sewing needle to lift the vellum without tearing it. It opened no larger than 2 postage stamps. Brown ink covered one side. A broken red seal clung to the corner. Rosemary had learned enough Spanish from Elias's mother to recognize several words. Misión de San Pedro, Aguas Eternas. She traced the faded line with the needle tip. This is a map, part of one, and this mark. White Peak, her pulse strengthened. The old boundary markers on my deed use White Peak. Kiona nodded. The priests used natural markers, ridge, spring, stone, not the creek that moves. Rosemary sat back. The room felt different. The fence was still there. Her barrels were still nearly empty. The calf was still sick. But the fight had changed shape. Is the rest of it really at the mission? I believe so. You believe. Yes, that's not much to ride 30 miles through August heat on. No. She looked again at the scrap. What if Vance knows? He watches you because he is afraid you know something. Then he may follow. Yes. Rosemary folded the vellum and returned it to the locket. For several seconds neither spoke. Then she stood. We leave before dawn. Kiona looked up at her. You are weak. So are my horses. The trail is worse. So is staying here. A faint expression crossed his face. Approval, perhaps. He rose. Rosemary reached for the bread beneath the kitchen cloth. Have you eaten? Yesterday. That wasn't the question. She cut the heel in half. They ate without speaking while the pump beyond the fence worked through the night. Before dawn, Rosemary made coffee so weak it barely colored the water. She and Kiona did not waste time discussing what could not be carried. They packed only what the horses could manage in the heat: 2 canteens, a small sack of parched corn, dried venison, a coil of rope, a blanket each, cartridges, a tin of salt, a hatchet, a short pry bar, and 3 canvas pouches lined with wax. Kiona brought prickly pear fruit from the lower wash. At the kitchen table, Rosemary scraped the fine spines from the purple skins with the back of a knife. He sliced the fruit and packed the wet flesh into the waxed pouches. "Emergency water?" she asked. "Emergency sense." She looked at him. "If you drink too fast when you are overheated, your stomach throws it back. Fruit slows you down." "You always this cheerful before sunrise?" "No, that was almost a joke." It was not. Rosemary smiled despite herself. She soaked 2 cotton neckcloths in the last water from the kitchen barrel and sealed them in a tin. Then she went to the barn. Belle was too weak for the trip. Rosemary stood with her forehead against the mare's face. "I'll come back." Belle breathed against her cheek. Kiona had brought a compact buckskin mare and a rangy gray gelding. Rosemary took the gray. He did not ask if she could ride him. Vance's fence guard watched from a distance. Rosemary tied the locket beneath her shirt. When they rode out, the eastern sky was only beginning to pale. They did not take the town road. From a rimrock shelf half a mile away, Silas Vance watched them through field glasses. Bart Rollins sat his horse behind him. "They're heading north," Bart said. "I can see that." "Mission country." Vance lowered the glasses. He had slept poorly. The scout's appearance bothered him more than Rosemary's refusal to sell. A widow could be pressured. A debtor could be cornered. A thirsty rancher eventually counted losses. But Kiona knew the older roots. Years earlier, Vance had heard a story in Tucson from a land attorney who collected documents. The lawyer had mentioned a mission grant somewhere in the Gila Basin, an old claim so broad and badly archived that no one had bothered to pursue it. Vance had dismissed the story because most men with old parchment had no money to enforce it. Now Rosemary Thorne was riding toward San Pedro with an Apache scout. Vance handed the glasses to Bart. "Follow them. Bring them back. Find out what they're after. And if it's papers." Vance adjusted his cuff. "Bring me the papers." Bart grinned. Vance looked at him. "I did not tell you to kill anyone. You want me to ask politely? I want the problem solved without creating a martyr." Bart's grin faded. Vance returned his gaze to the small riders in the distance. He did not consider himself cruel. Cruelty was inefficient. He considered himself a man who understood what the valley would become. Rail lines were pushing west. Beef contracts were growing. Towns would need water. Cattle would need water. And the person who controlled the reliable sources would control the future. Small ranches cut the valley into pieces. Families wasted acreage on sentiment and tradition. Vance believed consolidation was inevitable. The Thorne Well was not just another pump. It sat over one of the strongest shallow feeds in the basin. He had spent 6 years buying every parcel around it. He would not let an old widow and an older story ruin that. "Don't lose them," he said. Bart touched his hat and rode. The morning stayed cool for less than 2 hours. By 8, the sun had erased every soft color from the valley. The earth turned white, rust, and hard yellow. Rosemary followed Kiona through a shallow canyon where mesquite grew in the cracks and lizards, scattered beneath the horse's feet. The gray gelding was called Cooper. "He doesn't like snakes," Kiona said. "Does anyone? He reacts before he thinks." "So do I." Kiona looked back. "Yes." Rosemary ignored that. They rode at a steady walk. Kiona chose ground that looked wrong to her. He left the obvious trail and followed gravel shelves, dry stream channels, and strips of rock where hoofprints vanished. Sometimes he stopped without warning and listened. Near noon, he pointed to a white mineral line halfway up a canyon wall. Water once stood there. Rosemary squinted. That high, long before us. The line stretched along the red stone like a faded scar. What happened to it? Some went deeper. Some changed course. Water doesn't seem very loyal. Kiona shook his head. People mistake movement for disloyalty. Rosemary thought of Elias. She did not answer. The canyon narrowed. Kiona raised one hand. They stopped. A flicker of light appeared on the eastern ridge, then vanished. Rosemary felt the skin between her shoulders tighten. Glass? Probably. Bart? Probably. What now? Nothing fast. That seems backward. Fast makes dust. He turned his horse into a dry creek bed choked with rounded stones. They rode single file for the next hour. The creek walls rose around them, hiding them from the ridge. Hooves clicked against flat limestone rather than sinking into dust. Kiona doubled back once through a narrow cut, then crossed a shelf of exposed rock and descended another wash. Rosemary lost all sense of direction. You could leave me out here and I'd walk in circles until winter. You would not make winter comforting. You prefer a lie? No. Then keep Cooper behind me. She did. When the sun began to lower, they stopped beneath an overhang in the canyon wall. The shade smelled of warm sandstone and old animal droppings. Kiona checked the ground before allowing the horses in. Rosemary slid from the saddle and nearly collapsed. Her legs had gone numb. Kiona caught Cooper's reins, not her. She appreciated that. They fed the horses a little grain and gave them carefully measured water. Kiona poured 1 tin cup for Rosemary. She drank half and handed it back. Finish. You need some. I have another cup. You always lie this badly? I do not lie. You just said you had another cup. He held her gaze, then took 1 swallow and returned the rest. Rosemary drank it. After dark, the canyon cooled quickly. The heat left the stone in slow waves. They ate corn and venison. Kiona sat near the mouth of the overhang, rifle across his knees. Rosemary lay on her blanket but could not sleep. After a while she said Elias thought the north corner was dry. Kiona did not turn. He told me. He dug there for 3 months. I know. The survey showed an old seep. Surveyors saw grass after wet years. He believed them. He wanted to believe. Rosemary rolled onto her side. He nearly killed himself digging that first shaft. Came in every night with his hands split open. I told him to stop. He said if he stopped, we lost the ranch. Kiona poked the small fire with a stick. Then he found the cottonwoods. Yes, he listened then. Rosemary looked toward the stars. I used to think stubbornness saved us. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it keeps a person digging in dry ground. She smiled faintly in the dark. That sounds like you knew him well. Enough. What did he tell you about me? Kiona was quiet long enough that she thought he would refuse. He said you could turn 1 chicken into 4 meals. Rosemary laughed. The sound startled her. That is what he chose to say? He also said you were the only person he knew who could be angry while mending a shirt. That is more accurate. Kiona's mouth moved at one corner. Rosemary watched him. There was a grief in his face she had not asked about. She knew better than to pull at it simply because the night felt close. Instead, she said, "Why did your grandmother keep that piece of vellum?" Because paper changes what white men remember. That's a hard answer. It is a hard history. The fire settled. Did she know my family? She knew the Thorne name, my husband's family, yes. What did they do for the mission? Kiona looked at the coals. Blacksmithing, livestock, repairs. Later they carried messages between settlements during fighting. The story changes depending on who tells it, so the map might not give me anything. It may give you water rights. It may give you nothing. You could have said that before I climbed onto Cooper. You would have come anyway. He was right. Rosemary pulled the blanket over her shoulders. Before sleep took her, she heard stones click somewhere high in the canyon. Kiona heard them too. His posture changed. Neither spoke. At first light, they were already riding. They reached the Singing Seep by mid-morning. Kiona had described it as a narrow crack in granite where water gathered beneath a shelf of rock. From a distance, Rosemary saw dark soil and a patch of green. Relief rose too quickly in her. Cooper smelled water and tried to hurry. Kiona blocked him. Wait, he dismounted. Rosemary watched him approach the seep. A young coyote lay on its side in the shade. Its legs were stiff. Kiona crouched but did not touch it. He studied the damp ground, then scraped a little white powder from the mud with the tip of his knife. His expression went flat. What? Strychnine. Rosemary felt ill. In the water? Near it. Enough washed in. Bart? Could be. Who else knows we're coming this way? Hunters use poison. You don't believe that. No. Kiona stood. Rosemary stared at the small pool. The horses pulled at their reins. Can we filter it? No. She looked at the coyote. Its body had twisted in death. Then, what? We move. We don't have enough water for both horses. Then we find another place. You said this was the place. I said it was the place I expected. His calm infuriated her. My ranch has maybe a day left. Belle can barely stand. My calf is dying. Vance is pumping my well while we follow a scrap of paper across a desert. And now the only water you counted on has poison in it. Kiona let her speak. That made her angrier. Say something. We move. She turned away. You make everything sound simple. No, his voice had changed. She looked back. Kiona pointed at the dead coyote. That is not simple. That is a man choosing to poison what he cannot own. His anger was quieter than hers, but deeper. He poisoned a spring my grandmother drank from. Children drank here, travelers, deer, coyotes. This place will be dangerous after Vance is gone. Rosemary looked at him. If Vance did it. Kiona nodded once. If. The single word carried more restraint than she felt capable of. They ate prickly pear pulp to save water and pushed north. By afternoon, Cooper's head hung lower. Kiona found up moisture beneath a stand of willows growing in a shaded cut. There was no pool, only dark earth. He dug with his hands until water began seeping into the hole. They waited. It took nearly an hour to collect enough to wet the horses' mouths. Rosemary watched Kiona use a folded cloth to strain mud from the shallow seep. You knew this was here? No. Then how did you find it? Willow. She looked at the leaves. They look half dead. Half alive is enough. They reached San Pedro Mission the next day. The ruins appeared gradually through the heat. First the broken bell tower, then roofless walls, then an arched entrance leaning toward collapse. Rosemary had imagined something grander. Instead, the mission looked exhausted. Wind had eaten the adobe corners round. A wooden cross lay broken in the courtyard. The old irrigation ditch was packed with tumbleweed and lizard tracks. They tied the horses in shade behind a wall. Kiona checked the ground. Someone has been here. Recently? He touched a boot print in the dust. Days, Vance? Maybe scavengers. Rosemary took her revolver from the saddle. Kiona said nothing. Inside the chapel, the smell changed. Bat guano, dry wood, old plaster, mouse nests. Light came through holes in the roof in bright columns filled with floating dust. Rosemary stepped over a fallen beam. Near the remains of a baptismal font, her boot touched something small. A child's shoe lay half buried in dirt. The leather had turned hard and black with age. Rosemary picked it up. It was no longer than her hand. For a moment the mission ceased to be a ruin. She imagined a mother kneeling to tie that shoe, a child squirming, a priest clearing his throat, bread baking somewhere outside, goats complaining in a pen, buckets knocking against a well curb. Ordinary life. Then heat and time had swallowed all of it. Rosemary set the shoe on the edge of the font. Kiona had moved toward the altar. He knelt and brushed dust from the floor. What are you looking for? Different stone. Rosemary joined him. The sanctuary floor was made of uneven tile and flagstone. Kiona tapped several stones with the butt of his knife. One gave a hollow answer. Together they cleared debris. An iron ring appeared. Kiona pulled. Nothing happened. Rosemary wedged the pry bar through the ring. On three? He nodded. They pulled together. The trapdoor lifted with a long wooden shriek. Cool air rose from below. Rosemary closed her eyes. It smelled damp. Not wet exactly, but damp enough to make the inside of her nose sting with memory. Kiona lit a lantern. Stone steps led underground. The cellar was smaller than Rosemary expected, with a low vaulted ceiling and walls lined by decayed shelves. Broken bottles lay beneath the remnants of wine racks. Several crates had collapsed into piles of gray timber. At the far wall sat an iron chest. Rosemary looked at Kiona. That seems convenient. Maybe people use chests. Let me have one suspicious thought. You have many. The lock was rusted but thick. Rosemary tried the pry bar and failed. She remembered the nickel-plated stirrup iron on Cooper's saddle. Minutes later, she returned with it. She wedged the curved metal beneath the chest lid and put her weight down. The first attempt only scraped rust. The second bent the hinge. On the third, something cracked. The lid opened. Inside were bundles wrapped in oilcloth. Rosemary forgot the heat. She forgot Vance. She forgot the pain in her thighs and the thirst at the back of her throat. She touched the top bundle with both hands. Kiona. He held the lantern closer. The first bundle contained parish records. The second held correspondence tied with rotten ribbon. Beneath them was a ledger bound in cracked calfskin. Rosemary lifted it onto the stone floor. The pages resisted opening. She worked slowly, separating them one by one. Most entries were in Spanish. Births, deaths, supplies, livestock counts, a drought year, a fever year, a list of families receiving seed. Then she found the Thorne name, not Rosemary's name, not Elias's, Nathaniel Thorne. The date was 1794. Rosemary read the line twice. Her Spanish was imperfect, but the essential words were clear. Donation, sacred well, stewardship. She looked at Kiona. This is his family. Yes, Elias never knew. Maybe his father did not know. His grandfather? Kiona shook his head. Records disappear. Stories disappear faster when people are ashamed of who told them. Rosemary traced the line with a dirty finger. The entry described a grant to Nathaniel Thorne and his descendants in exchange for maintaining tools, livestock, and access to water around the mission. It referred to older agreements with Apache families who had identified the water sources. Rosemary's heart beat harder. This proves a claim. It proves there was one. not where the boundary runs. Kiona turned several pages. A folded sheet of oilcloth lay tucked into the binding. He stopped. Rosemary's breath caught. She eased it out. The oilcloth had been sealed with wax thread. Inside was vellum, not a fragment, a rolled map. Its edges were singed but intact. They unrolled it beneath the lantern. Blue lines marked waterways and subterranean channels. Brown ridges crossed the page. Spanish notes identified White Peak, Devil's Backbone, San Pedro Mission, and a symbol Rosemary knew immediately, the well. El Pozo Eterno, the eternal well. A red boundary line enclosed the Thorne parcel. The modern creek was nowhere in it. The old stone markers were. Rosemary placed both hands on the floor. For several seconds she could not speak. Kiona studied the map. His finger followed a blue line beneath the mountains. This matches. What? The Underriver. You're certain? He pointed at one spring, then another. My grandmother took me there. This one dried when I was 12. This one still runs after snow years. The map knows both. Rosemary laughed once, then covered her mouth. It came out half-sob. Silas fenced a well that was never his. Kiona looked at the red boundary. He may have fenced more than that. The grant extended beyond her current deed into pasture Vance had purchased from others. Rosemary stared. I don't want his whole ranch. Map does not ask what you want. I want my water. Then use what you need. A sound came through the ceiling. Faint, rhythmic hoofbeats. Rosemary and Kiona looked up at the same time. Dust sifted from a crack in the trapdoor. Kiona blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. Above, a man shouted. Bart Rawlins had found the mission. The first voice Rosemary heard belonged to a man she did not know. 2 horses out back. Bart answered from somewhere near the chapel entrance. They're here. Boots moved across the floor above. Kiona put one hand against Rosemary's arm. She could not see his face, but she understood. Do not move. Do not speak. The cellar smelled suddenly stronger in the dark. Dust, old leather, rust, damp stone, their own sweat. Rosemary rolled the Spanish map around the ledger page that carried the Thorne grant, wrapped both in oilcloth, and tied the bundle against her body beneath her shirt. The parchment felt stiff against her ribs. Above them, a chair or piece of timber crashed aside. Bart called out. Rosemary, the sound echoed through the ruined nave. No point hiding, your horses told on you. Rosemary's jaw tightened. Kiona crouched beside the far wall, feeling along the stone with both hands. She leaned close enough to whisper. What are you doing? Looking for what? Way out, that would be useful. A board creaked directly above the trapdoor. Rosemary froze. Bart's voice came nearer. Mr. Vance doesn't want this ugly. Bring me what you found and we all ride home. Rosemary almost laughed. Home. As though her home were not the very thing his employer was trying to take. The trapdoor shifted. Kiona caught Rosemary's sleeve and pulled her behind a row of broken wine racks. Light sliced into the cellar as the door opened. Bart stood at the top of the stairs, framed by the chapel's fading daylight. His revolver was in his right hand. Well, he said. There you are. 2 men stood behind him. Rosemary stepped into view. Bart looked at the oilcloth shape under her shirt. Hand it over. No, Rose, you poisoned the singing seep. His face changed. One of the men behind him glanced at the other. Bart recovered quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. There was strychnine in the mud. Lots of poison in this country, not before you started following us. Bart descended 2 steps. Kiona remained unseen in the shadows. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Bart said. You keep saying that, because you keep proving it. I found the grant. That stopped him. For a moment, Rosemary saw exactly what Vance had told him. Bart's eyes went to the chest, the open ledger, the bundles of paper. What kind of grant? The kind your boss was afraid existed. Bart came down 1 more step. Give it to me. No. You think some rotten priest paper is going to save you? I think Silas does. Bart's jaw worked. He looked tired. Not weak, not sorry. Just tired in a way Rosemary had never noticed when he was sitting behind a rifle. Vance owns the registrar, he said. Owns half the county board. Has lawyers in Tucson who can bury a paper until your grandchildren are dead. I don't have grandchildren. You know what I mean. No. I know what you mean when you point a rifle at me. I know what you mean when a spring turns up poisoned. I know what you mean when my animals go without water so a rich man can buy my land cheap. Bart looked over his shoulder at his men. Search the chest. The first man started down. Kiona moved. He came out of the dark behind the wine racks without a sound and struck the man's wrist before the pistol cleared leather. The gun hit the steps. Kiona shoved him backward into the second man, and both stumbled into Bart. The cellar exploded into noise. Rosemary grabbed the lantern, hurled it toward the opposite wall, and plunged the room into darkness again before anyone could orient. A gun fired. The muzzle flash lit the stairwell for half a second. Stone chips struck Rosemary's cheek. Kiona caught her hand. Here. He dragged her toward the rear wall. Bart cursed above them. Another shot hit a crate. Rosemary felt Kiona's hand find an iron ring beneath rotted grain sacks. He pulled. A narrow grate came up from the floor. Cold air breathed out. Down. Rosemary stared at the black opening. You first. No, that wasn't a suggestion. Another boot hit the cellar floor. Rosemary lowered herself into the opening. Her boots found wet stone. Kiona dropped after her and pulled the grate mostly closed. They crouched in a passage barely high enough to crawl. Behind them, Bart shouted. A lantern flared in the cellar. Kiona pushed Rosemary forward. The tunnel sloped downward. The stone was smoother than the cellar walls and fitted with deliberate care. Water trickled in a narrow channel along one side. Rosemary put her hand into it. Cold, clean. She almost stopped. Kiona touched her shoulder. Move, they crawled. Behind them came the scrape of the grate. They found it, Rosemary whispered. Yes. The passage narrowed until her shoulders brushed stone. Her knees burned through her trousers. The bundle beneath her shirt dug into her ribs. The air smelled of minerals and moss. A smell so alive compared with the dead heat above that Rosemary could have wept. Where does it go? Map showed a water passage toward the canyon. You saw that in 1 minute? I was looking. So was I. You were celebrating. That seems unfair. A shot cracked behind them. The sound became monstrous inside the tunnel. Rosemary ducked instinctively. Kiona pushed her faster. They reached a low basin where water collected ankle-deep. Rosemary paused long enough to cup one handful to her mouth. Kiona did not stop her this time. The cold made her teeth hurt. It was the best water she had ever tasted. Then they kept moving. Light appeared ahead after what felt like an hour, but could not have been more than 15 minutes. The tunnel opened behind a curtain of brittle brush at the base of the canyon. They crawled out into late afternoon. Rosemary lay on her back for 3 breaths. Kiona pulled the brush into place over the opening. Smoke rose above the mission wall. Rosemary sat up. What are they burning? Kiona's face hardened. They circled through the rocks until they could see the courtyard. Bart's men were carrying records from the chapel and throwing them into a fire. The flames had already reached one collapsed section of roof. Rosemary watched a leather-bound book hit the coals and curl open. No. She started forward. Kiona caught her around the arm. They're burning the proof. You have proof. The ledger. You have the grant page. There were other names, other water rights. I know. His voice was flat. Pain showed in it anyway. Rosemary looked at the fire. The mission records belonged to people long dead, but she suddenly understood what Vance was doing with terrible clarity. He was not merely destroying evidence against himself. He was deciding which past was allowed to remain. Bart used a cedar pole to push a stack of papers deeper into the flames. One of his men said something Rosemary could not hear. Bart snapped back, angry. Kiona pulled her lower. We need horses. They'll be watching them. Yes. What do you suggest? Wait until smoke gets worse. That's your plan? It is the beginning. The wind shifted. Smoke rolled across the courtyard. Kiona moved first, keeping behind the outer wall. Rosemary followed. They reached the horses just as shouting started inside the chapel. Someone had found the tunnel exit. Cooper lifted his head. Rosemary put one hand over his muzzle. Not now. Kiona cut the tether rather than untying it. They mounted behind the wall. Then a man appeared at the corner, he shouted. Kiona slapped Rosemary's gray on the rump. Ride. Cooper lunged. Rosemary bent low over his neck as they burst from cover. A shot sounded behind them. Then another. No bullet hit close enough for her to hear it. The horses ran east into the canyon. Bart's men mounted within minutes. The chase through Devil's Backbone became less about speed than survival. Kiona chose trails that barely deserved the name, cutting across shale slopes and through narrow cuts where the pursuing horses had to slow. Rosemary kept Cooper behind him. Her body was exhausted beyond fear. She responded to the land one command at a time. Lean left, duck branch. Give him rein, hold, climb, breathe. The map struck her ribs with every stride. At one point, Cooper lost his footing on loose stone. His hindquarters slid toward the edge of a narrow shelf. Rosemary threw her weight uphill. Kiona turned his horse sideways and caught Cooper's bridle. For 3 seconds, the gray scrambled against the slope. Then he found footing. Rosemary's hands shook. Kiona released the bridle. You hurt? No. Horse? No. Then move. She stared at him. One day I'm going to need more comfort than that. Today, no. They rode. Behind them, Bart's men appeared at the far end of the shelf. One fired into the air. Rose, Bart shouted. You're going to kill yourself over paper. Rosemary twisted in the saddle. You poisoned a spring over it. The canyon threw her voice back in pieces. Kiona almost smiled. They reached the ridge above Gila Crossing near sunset. Below, a line of willows marked a shallow riverbed, and beyond it stood the small adobe office of Territorial Marshal Garrett Stone. Rosemary had met Stone once after Elias's death. He was not a friend. He was not even local. That was why she trusted him more than Sheriff Reddick. They rode down the ridge. Bart followed but slowed when he saw the outpost. Rosemary and Kiona crossed the riverbed at a gallop, passed two startled freight drivers, and stopped in front of the marshal's office. Rosemary nearly fell when she dismounted. Kiona caught her elbow this time. She let him. The door opened before they reached it. Marshal Garrett Stone stood on the threshold, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, a revolver at his hip. He was a tall man in his late 50s with a gray mustache and the heavy-lidded eyes of someone who distrusted excitement. He looked at Rosemary, then Kiona, then the dust cloud on the ridge. Mrs. Thorne, Marshal, you appear to have brought company. Not by invitation. Stone's hand settled near his revolver. Bart and his men had stopped several hundred yards away. They did not approach. Stone looked back at Rosemary. What happened? She took the oilcloth bundle from beneath her shirt. Do you have a table? Stone stepped aside. Inside, the office smelled of ink, gun oil, tobacco, and apples. A half-eaten apple sat beside a stack of warrants. Rosemary placed the bundle on the desk. Her fingers would not stop trembling. Stone noticed. Water first. I need you to see this. You need water first. He poured from a stoneware jug. Rosemary drank slowly. Kiona took a cup after her. Only then did Stone untie the bundle. The Spanish map opened across his desk. He stopped chewing. Where did you get this? San Pedro Mission. That place is a pile of walls. It had a cellar. Stone leaned closer. Rosemary set the grant page beside the map. This name is Nathaniel Thorne, Elias's ancestor. The entry says the sacred well and surrounding parcel were granted to his family in perpetuity. Stone glanced at her. You read Spanish? Enough to know when someone has been stealing from me. Kiona pointed to the old markers on the map. White Peak, Devil's Backbone, Mission Ridge, Eternal Well. Stone looked at him. You're certain those correspond to current landmarks? Yes, how certain? Kiona met his eyes. I can take you to each. Stone sat down. Outside, hoofbeats approached, not Bart, a carriage. Rosemary looked through the window. Silas Vance stepped down. Her stomach tightened. He knew we were coming here. Stone's face gave nothing away. Did you expect him not to? Vance entered without knocking. He had changed clothes. That irritated Rosemary more than it should have. She stood covered in dust, smoke, dried blood from the scrape on her cheek, and tunnel mud at both knees. Kiona smelled of horse and fire. Vance looked ready for dinner. He placed a sealed territorial notice on the desk. Marshal Stone, I understand, Mrs. Thorne has brought you a misunderstanding. Rosemary almost admired the nerve. Stone did not look at the notice. I'm examining something. Vance saw the map. For the first time since Rosemary had known him, he lost control of his expression. Only for a second, but she saw it, fear. Then it vanished. An antique, he said. Stone turned the map slightly toward the light. Could be. It has no legal force. Could be. My deeds are current. Could be. Vance's mouth tightened. Is that all you intend to say? Stone reached into a drawer and took out a magnifying glass. For the moment. The marshal examined the seal, the ink, the parchment, and the handwriting. Then he opened a thick territorial reference book and compared old boundary descriptions. Vance began talking. He spoke of modernization, later surveys, county filings, accepted taxation boundaries, adverse possession, water association. Stone ignored him. Rosemary watched the marshal's finger travel down a column, then stop. He looked at the Spanish map again. Mrs. Thorne, do you still have the stone markers described here? 2, maybe 3. Elias used one as a pasture corner. Kiona? I know 4. Stone nodded. Vance exhaled impatiently. This is absurd. You cannot overturn 50 years of recorded property based on a relic found in a burned church. Stone finally looked at him. I haven't overturned anything. Then enforce my existing claim. I won't be doing that either. Vance stiffened. Stone tapped the grant page. This is enough for an emergency hold on any seizure of Mrs. Thorne's water until a land judge can review it. Rosemary's knees nearly gave. Vance stepped closer. You have no authority to. Stone looked up. I have authority to prevent violence during a disputed claim. I also have authority to investigate reports of armed intimidation, poisoning of a public seep, destruction of historical records, and attempted theft of legal documents. Silence. Vance's eyes flicked toward Rosemary. She said nothing. Stone continued. Your man Rollins followed them to the mission. I gave no order to destroy records. I didn't say you did. You implied it. I observed that you became defensive before I asked. Vance's face darkened. Stone folded his hands. Here's what happens next. I ride to the Thorne Ranch tonight. The fence around the well comes down pending review. Mrs. Thorne regains access to water immediately. Tomorrow I send a deputy to the Territorial Land Office for copies of every survey connected to your purchases in the valley. Vance stared at him. You're making a serious mistake. Maybe. My attorneys can find me. Stone stood. And Silas? Vance stopped at the door. If Bart Rollins so much as looks at Mrs. Thorne through a rifle sight tonight, I will arrest him. If I find evidence he poisoned that seep or burned those records, I will arrest him anyway. Vance looked at Rosemary. His voice was low. You think this is victory? Rosemary looked at the map. No. Then she met his eyes. I think it's water. Vance left. Only after the carriage rolled away did Rosemary breathe fully. Stone began putting on his coat. She frowned. You said tonight. I did. It's almost dark. Your stock won't care. Kiona rolled the map carefully. Rosemary looked at the marshal. What if a judge says the grant is invalid? Stone buckled on his gun belt. Then you fight that tomorrow. And tonight? Tonight nobody dies of thirst while lawyers argue. Rosemary looked down. That was the first thing anyone wearing a badge had said to her all week that sounded like law rather than paperwork. Stone took the last slice of apple from his desk. You eaten? Not since morning. He handed it to her. Rosemary bit into it. The crispness and juice were almost painfully sweet. Kiona watched her. What? She asked. You are celebrating again. She chewed. This time I'm eating. They left Gila crossing under a moon bright enough to silver the river stones. Marshal Stone rode a tall bay gelding and carried the Spanish map in a leather document case strapped beneath his coat. Rosemary had argued that she should carry it. Stone refused. You've been shot at for it once. Twice, if we're counting the cellar. Then I'm proving my point. Kiona rode ahead, reading the dark trail by shapes Rosemary could barely see. They traveled slowly enough to spare the horses. The night air cooled Rosemary's burned face, but fatigue settled into her bones until every movement hurt. She kept thinking of Belle, the mare's lowered head, the sick calf in the barn shade, the empty trough. Marshal, she said after an hour. Stone rode beside her. What? If the well is dry when we get there? Is it? Kiona says the aquifer's strong. Stone glanced at the scout ahead. I've learned not to wager against him on water. You know him 20 years. Kiona did not turn. Rosemary raised an eyebrow. You might have mentioned that. You did not ask, Kiona said. Stone laughed quietly. Rosemary shook her head. What else have both of you decided I don't need to know? Stone answered, he once found me half dead in a wash after my horse broke a leg. Kiona said, he was not half dead. I felt half dead. You complained too much. I had a broken wrist. You complained before that. Rosemary laughed, then winced because the motion pulled at the cut on her cheek. For a few minutes, the road felt almost ordinary. Then Kiona stopped. He slid from the saddle and crouched beside the trail. Stone dismounted. Rosemary stayed mounted. What? Kiona pointed at hoofprints crossing the road. 4 riders. Recent. Bart? Stone asked. Likely. Heading southwest. Rosemary's stomach sank. My ranch. Kiona nodded. Stone remounted. Then we move. They reached the Thorne property shortly before dawn. Even in darkness, Rosemary recognized something wrong. No pump, no cattle movement, no barking from the old sheepdog, only wind. She spurred Cooper. Kiona caught up beside her. Slow. I've been slow for 4 days. They crested the last rise. The house still stood. The barn still stood. The wire still circled the well. A lantern burned beneath the cottonwoods. Rosemary saw 3 men. Bart was one of them. He had returned ahead of them. The sight of him made every exhausted muscle in her body tighten. Stone rode directly toward the fence. Bart stood. His right hand moved toward his holster, then stopped when he recognized the marshal. Morning, Stone said. Bart did not answer. The 2 hired men behind him shifted uneasily. Rosemary rode past them toward the corral. Belle lay on her side. For one terrible second, Rosemary thought she was dead. The mare's ear moved. Rosemary dropped from the saddle and knelt. Belle. The mare opened one eye. The trough was empty. Rosemary felt something hot and murderous move through her. She stood. How long since they had water? One of the hired men looked away. Bart said, Not my job to track your stock. Rosemary walked toward him. Kiona stepped between them only enough to force her to slow. Stone dismounted. Mr. Rawlins, Bart looked at him. Stone's voice remained conversational. I gave instruction at Gila Crossing that the Thorne well was to remain undisturbed pending legal review. You gave it to Vance. I'm giving it to you now. Bart spat into the dirt. Vance says the claim stands until a judge signs otherwise. Stone pulled the document case from under his coat. Vance is not the territorial marshal. He owns the deed. Stone opened the case and removed a written order. This is an emergency restoration of access under my authority until the court hearing. Bart did not take it. Stone held it out anyway. You can read? Bart's face reddened. I can read, then read. Bart snatched the paper. His eyes moved across it. The other men watched him. Rosemary could see the moment he realized Vance's confidence had become a liability. This is temporary, Bart said. Stone nodded. That is what temporary means. You expect me to tear down a fence because you rode in here with some old church map? I expect you to step away while Mrs. Thorne cuts it. Bart looked at Rosemary. She went to Kiona's saddle and took out the wire cutters. They were the same pair Bart had forced her to carry back to the house at gunpoint. She walked to the first strand. Bart moved. Stone's revolver appeared in his hand. So quickly Rosemary did not see the draw. The barrel pointed at Bart's chest. Don't. Bart stopped. The valley went quiet. One of the hired men slowly lowered his rifle to the ground. The second followed. Bart stared at Stone. You going to shoot me over a fence? No. Stone's eyes did not move. I'm going to shoot you if you draw a weapon while resisting a lawful order. The fence is incidental. Bart's hand drifted away from his holster. Rosemary placed the cutters around the first strand. The wire was pulled tight enough to hum. She squeezed. Nothing, her hands were swollen and weak. Kiona came beside her. He did not take the tool. He put one hand over hers. Together they leaned. The wire snapped. The loose end whipped backward and struck a post with a metallic crack. Belle lifted her head in the corral. Rosemary moved to the second strand. This time she cut it herself. Then the third. The fence sagged. Kiona dragged the wire aside. Rosemary walked through. For the first time in days, nothing stopped her. She reached the pump, her hand closed around the iron handle. It was hot from the previous day's sun and rough with rust. She pushed down. The pump gave a dry cough. Again, another cough. Panic tightened her throat. Again, the leather seal groaned. Then the pipe below answered with a deep, wet sound. Cold water surged from the spout. It hit the trough in a silver arc. Rosemary stopped breathing. The smell reached her first. Wet stone, iron, deep earth. Then the sound. Water striking wood. She had spent days imagining it. The reality was louder. Kiona worked the pump while Rosemary opened the corral gate. Belle tried to stand and failed. Rosemary and one of the other horses reached the trough first. The remaining stock followed with desperate, uneven steps. Rosemary carried a bucket to Belle. She knelt beside the mare and held the water under her muzzle. Belle drank, slowly at first, then harder. Rosemary kept one hand against her neck. That's enough, easy. The mare tried to pull more. Rosemary let her have another small amount. The sick calf received water by cup. Stone watched from near the fence. Bart stood 20 yards away, face closed. One of his men approached the trough. He hesitated. Rosemary looked at him. The man removed his hat. Ma'am, I haven't had water since last night. Bart turned sharply. You have a canteen? Empty. Rosemary looked at the trough, then at the man. Drink. He stared. Bart said, You don't owe him anything. Rosemary's eyes stayed on the hired hand. I know. The man knelt and drank from his cupped hands. Kiona looked at Rosemary. She shrugged. I'm angry. Not stupid. A carriage appeared on the road after sunrise. Silas Vance arrived with Sheriff Reddick. Rosemary almost laughed at the sight. The local sheriff dismounted first and looked immediately uncomfortable when he saw Marshal Stone. Garrett, Amos. Reddick adjusted his gun belt. Silas said there was an unlawful trespass. Stone looked around. On whose land? Reddick opened his mouth, closed it. Vance climbed from the carriage. He took in the cut wire, the drinking horses, and Bart standing disarmed. His face hardened. What have you done? Stone held up the emergency order. Prevented a livestock die-off. You exceeded your authority. File a complaint. Vance turned to Rosemary. You think you can simply take possession because you found a piece of Spanish parchment? Rosemary was too tired for theater. She carried another bucket to Belle. Vance followed. I'm speaking to you. I heard. You have no idea what that grant means. It means enough that you sent men 30 miles to burn the records. Bart looked at Vance. A mistake. Small but visible. Stone saw it. So did Rosemary. Vance's attention snapped to Bart. What is she talking about? Bart's expression said he understood too late that he was being isolated. You told me to get the papers. I told you to determine what she found. You said bring you anything that mattered. I did not tell you to burn a church. Wasn't much of a church. Stone stepped closer. Mr. Rollins, did you burn records at San Pedro Mission? Bart looked from Stone to Vance. Vance's face had become unreadable. Rosemary understood the choice Bart faced. Protect the man who paid him, or admit what happened and perhaps save himself from carrying all of it. Bart spat. His lawyer said old records could cause trouble. Vance's voice sharpened. Careful. Bart laughed without humor. There it is. Bart, you want careful now? Stone held up one hand. Keep talking. Vance turned. Marshal, this is ridiculous. The man is angry because I'm ending his employment. Bart looked at him. You're ending? I have no use for men who exceed clear instructions. Rosemary saw something in Bart collapse. Not conscience. Loyalty. He pointed at Vance. He told us the widow had 4 days of water. Said once the stock started dropping she'd sign. Vance stepped toward him. Stone blocked the way. Bart continued. He told Pike to raise her price in town. Told Reddick the dispute was civil. Told me to keep her off the well. Sheriff Reddick went pale. That's not. Bart turned on him. You were in Vance's office when he said it. Reddick looked at Stone. The marshal's expression did not change. Rosemary stared at Vance. There was no triumph in her yet, only confirmation. All the things she had suspected now stood in daylight. Vance looked at Bart with contempt. You think confession will make you innocent? No. Bart's voice was suddenly quiet, but it might make me less useful to hang alone. Stone took Bart's revolver. Then he turned to Vance. I'll need you to come back to Gila Crossing. Vance laughed. For what? Conspiracy to interfere with a disputed water right. Destruction of historical records. Possible poisoning of a natural water source. We'll sort out the exact charges when my deputy returns from the land office. You cannot arrest me on the word of a hired thug. Not only his word. Stone looked at Sheriff Reddick. Amos? Reddick stared at the ground. Vance's gaze became dangerous. Sheriff, Reddick swallowed. I saw the survey before it was filed. Rosemary's head lifted. Stone waited. Reddick rubbed a hand over his face. The first survey kept the well on the Thorne parcel. Vance said nothing. Reddick continued. Vance paid for a second run after arguing the creek bed should define the line. Rosemary's hand tightened around the bucket handle. Did you know? Reddick looked at her. Yes. The word was barely audible. Her anger returned so sharply she felt dizzy. You let me stand in your office and beg. Reddick's eyes dropped. I told myself it was for the court. You told yourself 3 months was paperwork. He had no answer. Vance reached into his vest. Stone's revolver came up. Easy. Vance withdrew a gold watch. He held it by the chain. For a second, Rosemary thought he was simply checking the time. Then Vance extended it towards Stone. Garrett, we've known one another a long time. Stone looked at the watch. Not that long. There's no need to drag every misunderstanding in this valley before a judge. Misunderstanding. People acted badly in a severe drought. We can compensate Mrs. Thorne. Repair the mission if she insists replace livestock. Everyone walks away. Rosemary watched him. The same man who had offered to buy her home for less than the barn was now offering to buy the consequences. Stone took the watch. Vance relaxed. Then Stone walked to the trough. He dropped it in. The gold watch sank between the horses' reflected faces. Vance stared. Stone said, Water seems to be worth more today. Bart barked a laugh. Vance's face went dark red. Stone placed handcuffs on him. The click was small. Rosemary heard it clearly. Vance looked at her as Stone secured his wrists. This won't hold. Maybe not, Rosemary said. He expected more. She gave him nothing. Stone placed Bart under arrest as well, though more gently. Reddick stood aside, stripped of whatever authority he thought he possessed in the moment. Before Stone mounted, Rosemary walked to him. What about my land? Tomorrow we verify markers. Then a judge hears the grant. And Vance's purchases may get complicated. I don't want half the valley. Stone gave her a tired look. Legal rights and personal wants are rarely the same problem. Kiona joined them. Stone nodded toward the well. You two found the one paper in Arizona capable of giving 5 attorneys heart trouble. Rosemary looked at the running water. We found more than paper. Stone followed her gaze. Yes, he mounted. Vance was tied to the rear of Stone's saddle horse, furious and silent. Bart sat another mount with his hands bound in front. As they prepared to leave, the hired man who had asked Rosemary for water stepped forward. Marshal? Stone looked at him. I saw Rollins put poison in sacks before we rode north. Bart closed his eyes. Stone sighed. Of course you did. The man continued. I thought it was for coyotes. Come to the office this afternoon and make a statement. Yes, sir. The group rode away. Sheriff Reddick remained. Rosemary looked at him. You should go too. Rose, no. He removed his hat. I was wrong. That doesn't water a horse. I know. Do you? Reddick looked toward Belle. He put his hat back on. Then he walked to his horse and left. By mid-morning, Rosemary had drunk 3 careful cups of water. She washed the cut on her cheek. She filled every barrel beneath the eaves. She soaked cloth and laid it across Belle's neck. Kiona repaired the pump seal. Neither spoke for almost an hour. Eventually, Rosemary sat on the edge of the trough. Her boots were wet. She did not care. Kiona tightened a bolt. You are staring. I'm making sure it doesn't disappear. Water? All of it. He glanced at her. Fences cut. Fences can go back up. Yes. Maps can burn. Yes. Marshals can retire. Yes. She frowned. You're supposed to tell me I'm worrying too much. I do not think that. What do you think? Kiona stood and wiped his hands on a cloth. I think a well should have more than one keeper. Rosemary looked at him. Before she could answer, a line of wagons appeared on the road from town. The first wagon belonged to Edwin Pike. Rosemary recognized the general store owner before he climbed down because no one else in Gila Flats drove a wagon that clean. Behind him came the blacksmith, 2 ranch families from the South Road, a pair of teamsters, and 3 men Rosemary had seen more than once drinking coffee in Pike's store while pretending not to notice her empty water barrels. They stopped near the porch. No one seemed certain what to do next. Rosemary remained by the trough. Kiona continued working on the pump. Pike removed his hat. I heard Stone came out here. He did, and the fence is down. You can see that. Pike looked at the horses drinking. Then he lifted a burlap sack from the wagon. Winter wheat. Rosemary said nothing. Best seed I've got. Thought you could use it. What does it cost today? Pike's face reddened. Nothing. That's a large discount. Rose. She stood. The others shifted behind him. Pike lowered the sack. I handled things poorly. You tripled the price of water. Vance controlled the spring contract. You still had a choice. If I sold to you at the old price, he threatened to cut my supply. And you believed him. Yes. So you decided his threat should become mine. Pike stared at the ground. Rosemary looked at the people behind him. Some had known her a decade. They had borrowed Elias's tools. They had eaten at her table after branding days. One woman had sat with Rosemary through the first night after Elias died because the house felt too empty. Now they stood like strangers waiting for a verdict. Rosemary was surprised by what she felt. Not rage, not satisfaction, wariness. She did not want them begging. She did not want a procession of apologies. She did not want to become the valley's injured saint simply because a richer man had finally fallen harder than she had. She pointed toward the trough. If you're thirsty, drink. No one moved. The water isn't a reward, she said. It also isn't a weapon. That was Vance's mistake. Pike looked up. What about the seed? Take it back. Rose, I'm trying to make it right. You're trying to make yourself feel right. The words struck him. Rosemary softened only slightly. Maybe you will make it right. Later. By what you do when the next person is inconvenient to help. Pike nodded. He put the sack back in the wagon. The blacksmith, Mateo Ruiz, stepped forward. I have 2 spare lengths of pump pipe. I don't need them. You might. That's different from a gift meant to a race last week. Mateo nodded. Trade then. Pipe for 2 days with your hay rake after rain, Rosemary considered. If rain ever comes, if it doesn't, you keep the pipe and I keep my optimism. She extended her hand. Deal. That broke the tension. One by one, people approached the trough. Not all. Some left. Rosemary remembered who did both. That afternoon, Belle stood on her own. The mare's legs shook, but she walked to the trough without help. Rosemary leaned against the corral rail and watched until her vision blurred. This time tears came. She wiped them away with the heel of her hand before anyone saw. Kiona saw. He looked away. For that kindness, Rosemary was more grateful than if he had spoken. The legal hearing took place 12 days later in a courtroom in Tucson. Rosemary had never liked cities, and Tucson in late summer did nothing to improve her opinion. Dust clung to everything. Carriages crowded the street. Men in dark coats argued in hallways as though volume were a form of evidence. She sat beside Marshal Stone with the Spanish map protected between sheets of clean board. Kiona sat behind them. Silas Vance entered with 2 attorneys. He wore a fresh suit. The bruised pride had returned to polish. Bart Rollins entered separately under guard. He looked older. Rosemary had learned that Bart agreed to testify in exchange for consideration on the destruction charges. She did not know how she felt about that. Justice, she was discovering, was less like a hammer than a kitchen drawer full of mismatched tools. Useful, frustrating, and rarely clean. The territorial land clerk testified first. He brought copies of the surveys associated with Vance's purchases. There were two versions of the Thorne boundary. The earlier survey placed the well inside the ranch using the old stone corners. The later one substituted the flood-shifted creek bed and moved the line just far enough to put the well outside. The surveyor who signed the revision had left Arizona 3 weeks earlier. No one knew where he had gone. Sheriff Reddick admitted under oath that Vance had pressured him to treat the matter as civil and delay intervention. Edwin Pike testified about the spring contract and the price increase. The hired hand testified that Bart carried strychnine north. Bart admitted burning records at San Pedro. When asked who ordered it, he said Vance had demanded that no document capable of challenging the modern deed survive. Vance's attorneys objected. Bart laughed. The judge ordered him silent. Then came the map. A document examiner from the Territorial Archives spent nearly an hour describing ink, vellum, seal impressions, handwriting, and chain of historical references. Rosemary understood perhaps half of it. The conclusion she understood. The map was genuine. The grant entry was genuine. The old boundary descriptions corresponded with surviving stone markers still present in the valley. The court did not grant Rosemary ownership of every acre inside the old Spanish outline. Later sales, federal transfers, and intervening claims made that impossible and, in Rosemary's opinion, undesirable. But the judge ruled that the Thorne water right had never been lawfully extinguished. The eternal well belonged to the Thorne property. Access to it was protected. Vance's revised survey could not supersede the older fixed boundary markers. Rosemary sat very still while the clerk read the ruling. She had imagined this moment during the ride from San Pedro. In those imaginings, she always felt something large. Triumph. Vindication. A sudden release. Instead, she thought about breakfast. She thought about how early she would need to leave Tucson to reach home before the worst heat. She wondered whether Belle had eaten. She wondered if Kiona had remembered to ask Mateo's son to check the south pasture gate. Her life had become ordinary again so quickly that victory arrived almost quietly. Vance turned toward her as court adjourned. His attorneys tried to move him along. He stopped. "You could have taken the settlement." Rosemary stood. "What settlement?" "The first one." "The amount that wouldn't buy my barn? You would have been safe. My animals would be dead. You attach morality to business because you had the luxury of being small." Rosemary looked at him. There it was. The part of Silas Vance she understood at last. He truly believed scale excused cruelty. He believed the future belonged to men willing to do what softer people would not. "You thought I was small because you measured the wrong thing," she said. His face tightened. "You think one ruling changes the valley? No, someone else will buy the springs. Then we'll deal with them. You can't fight every man with money. Probably not." That answer seemed to unsettle him more than defiance. Rosemary continued. "But you don't get to decide I should surrender because another fight might come later." Vance looked past her at Kiona. "The scout won't stay forever." Rosemary followed his gaze. Kiona stood near the doorway, expression unreadable. "No," she said. "People stay if they choose." Vance was led away. The criminal case would continue for months. Rosemary did not attend most of it. She heard pieces. Charges related to coercion, destruction of records, unlawful seizure, bribery attempts, and contamination of a water source. Some stuck, some did not. Vance spent time in territorial custody before posting bond, then lost several contracts as creditors began asking questions about the legitimacy of his other water purchases. His empire did not vanish in a single afternoon. Real empires rarely did, but it stopped expanding. For Rosemary, that was enough. She returned home with the map wrapped in oilcloth beneath her seat. On the way, Kiona turned off the main trail. Rosemary knew the direction before he said anything. "The Seep," he nodded. They reached Singing Seep late in the afternoon. A deputy from Stone's office had already marked the area with 2 stakes and a strip of red cloth. The coyote had been removed for evidence, but the shallow pool remained untouched. Rosemary dismounted. The place seemed smaller than she remembered. A dark stain beneath granite, a few stubborn reeds, damp soil no bigger than a kitchen rug. Such a little place to matter so much. Kiona crouched near the edge but kept his hands away from the water. Rain may move poison deeper, he said. Can we dig it out? Some soil, not all. How long before it's safe? He shook his head. Could be months, could be longer. Rosemary looked at the willow roots. During the ride to San Pedro, she had thought defeating Vance would reverse everything he had done. Wire cut, water restored. Papers recognized. Here was proof that some damage did not respect courtroom endings. She pulled the small shovel from her saddle. What are you doing? Taking out the soil you said we can take out. Now, if we leave it, some animal drinks here tonight. Kiona studied her for a moment. Then he took the second shovel. They worked until sunset. They removed the visibly contaminated mud from the shallow edge and packed it into an empty feed sack, lined with oilcloth for the marshal's office to dispose of. Kiona built a loose barrier from thorn branches around the seep, not enough to stop a determined animal, but enough to discourage one from walking straight to the water. Rosemary tied fresh red cloth to a willow branch. Her shoulders ached. The work felt painfully small. She stood back. That's not much. No, I hate that answer. I know. She wiped her hands on her trousers. What would your grandmother have done? Kiona looked at the seep. Moved camp. That's it? She would remember not to drink here. Tell others. Return later. Rosemary frowned. I keep wanting a repair. Some things need waiting. She looked at him. You waited before coming to my ranch. Yes. I'm still not sure I forgive that. You were not ready. You sound very certain. You were carrying wire cutters toward a rifle. That is fair. Kiona looked at the barrier they had made. Waiting is not doing nothing. Rosemary considered the red cloth moving in the evening breeze. No fence could make the seep clean. No legal order could pull poison from stone. For once, stewardship meant leaving something alone. Before mounting, she took the measuring notebook from her saddlebag. On a blank page she wrote, Singing seep, do not drink, check after first 3 rains. Kiona read over her shoulder. You keep records now. I've always kept records. Of land, of feed, births, bills. He tapped the notebook. This is different. Rosemary closed it. Yes, they rode home in the dark. The page about the poisoned seep became the first entry in a new ledger that had nothing to do with ownership. 2 evenings later, she found Kiona saddling his mare. The sun had gone behind the western ridge, leaving the yard in long violet shadow. The air smelled of wet wood from the full trough and the faint sweetness of hay. Rosemary stood in the doorway. Where are you going? Kiona tightened the cinch. North. That is a large place. Yes. For how long? He shrugged. Rosemary walked to the porch rail. On the table inside lay the iron key to the well house. She had started carrying it after the hearing, then realized she disliked what it represented. A locked door was sometimes necessary. It was also how bad habits began. You did what you came to do, she said. Kiona nodded. The map is safe. Yes, the well is safe. For now. He looked at her. Rosemary stepped down from the porch. I need help. You have neighbors. I have neighbors who need time before I trust them. He waited. She chose her words carefully. I'm not asking you to work for me. Then what are you asking? The aquifer runs farther than my deed. The mission map shows springs I didn't know existed. If drought gets worse, people are going to start fighting over them. Yes. I don't want to become Vance from the other side of the fence. Kona's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. The court says the well is mine. It is, but you were right. The water doesn't know that. He said nothing. I want someone who understands the underriver to have a say in how we use it. Someone who will tell me when I'm digging in dry ground. You do not like being told. No. A pause. But I've survived it. The mare shifted. Rosemary continued. There's an empty room in the bunkhouse, or you can camp wherever you prefer. I can pay wages if you want wages. Share stock if you want stock. You can leave whenever you choose. Kiona looked toward the north. What would you call the work? Rosemary thought. Waterkeeper. That sounds like ownership. Then choose another name. He considered. Watcher. That sounds like a man on a hill with field glasses. The corner of his mouth moved. Steward. Too church-like. Scout. You already had that job. Then no name. Rosemary nodded. Best option so far. Kiona reached into a pouch at his belt. He withdrew a smooth gray stone rounded by water. He placed it on the porch step. Rosemary looked at it. What does that mean? It means unsaddle my horse. You can't unsaddle your own horse. I thought you needed help. She stared at him, then laughed. Put her in the east stall. He did. The following morning, Rosemary and Kiona began dismantling what remained of Vance's fence. They worked before sunrise. The cedar posts were too good to burn. Rosemary examined one after Kiona pulled it from the ground. Vance bought straight-grain cedar all the way from the high country. He expected fence to last. Seems rude not to use it. For what? Rosemary looked toward the main trail. Something wider than a fence. They hauled 6 posts to the road. Mateo brought scrap iron and 2 lengths of pipe. Pike came with nails. Rosemary almost sent him away. Then he put the keg of nails on the ground and said, "Trade. You sharpen my account books by telling me when I'm being a coward." She looked at him. "That may cost more than nails." I assumed. She let him stay. They built a public trough at the edge of the Thorne property where the main trail passed closest to the well line. Rosemary planed cedar boards while Kiona set stone. Mateo bent iron straps for the corners. Pike dug a drainage channel. No one talked much. Work had a way of making apology either real or irrelevant. By noon the trough took shape, wide enough for 4 horses, low enough for dogs. A smaller stone basin at one end for people to fill cups without drinking beside livestock. Rosemary insisted on that after remembering the water jar in Pike's store. They ran pipe from the well to a hand-controlled feed so the trough could be filled without wasting water. Kiona argued for an overflow channel into a shallow depression planted with willows. Rosemary agreed. "Half alive is enough?" she asked. He looked at her. "You remember. I occasionally listen. Rare." She threw a wood shaving at him. He stepped aside. The trough leaked at 3 seams. They drained it, dried the wood, heated pine pitch, and sealed the joints. It leaked at 1 seam. They did it again. By sunset it held. Rosemary opened the feed valve. Water ran into the new cedar basin. No speeches, no dedication, no sign with her name, only water. 3 days later, the first stranger used it. He came from the south on a bay horse that looked as tired as he did. A yellow dog trotted behind. The rider slowed when he saw the trough. Then he looked toward the house. Rosemary was repairing a harness on the porch. Kiona sat beneath the cottonwoods, shaping a new handle for a shovel. The stranger took off his hat. "How much?" Rosemary set down the awl. "For what?" "Water." "Nothing." He squinted as though he had misunderstood. "Nothing. Drink before your horse decides for you." The dog had already decided. It ran to the overflow basin and began lapping. The rider dismounted. His horse buried its muzzle in the trough. The man watched the animal drink. Then he filled a tin cup at the stone basin and swallowed 2 quickly. Kiona called from the shade, "Slow." The man coughed. Rosemary smiled. "He says that to everyone." Good advice, still annoying. The traveler drank again slower. "Creeks are dry for 20 miles. "I know. Who owns this well?" Rosemary looked at Kiona. He looked back. "The ranch holds the right," she said. "That's different." The traveler nodded as though he did not entirely understand but was too thirsty to care. He watered his horse, soaked his hat, filled his canteen, thanked them twice, and rode on. Rosemary watched him until Loswell swallowed the dust behind him. That evening she framed the Spanish map, not behind expensive glass. There was none in Gila Flats large enough. Mateo helped her build a shallow oak case with a hinged wooden cover to keep out dust and sun. The map hung on the wall between the hearth and the west window. Rosemary placed the small locket inside the case beside it. Kiona saw. "That is yours," he said. "The locket?" "Yes, it was your grandmother's. She kept it for the map. She kept it for memory." Kiona looked at the silver oval. Rosemary opened the case and removed it. She held it out. He did not take it. "You found what it carried," he said. "So did you." He shook his head. Rosemary closed her hand around it. "Then it stays here until one of us changes our mind." "That is different." "Good." That night, Rosemary carried a lantern to the graves beneath the cottonwoods. Elias's marker leaned slightly to the east. The dry season had loosened the soil around its base. She set the lantern down, fetched a shovel, and packed earth around the stone until it stood straight again. She did not speak to him. She had spent the first year after his death speaking to the grave whenever the house became too quiet. Later she stopped because every question she asked returned in her own voice. Now she brushed dust from the carved letters. Elias Thorne. Below the name, the dates. Nothing about wells. Nothing about debt. Nothing about the mornings he burned biscuits because he read while cooking. Nothing about the way he sang one line of the same hymn because he never learned the rest. Rosemary placed one hand on the stone. "You dug in the wrong place," she said at last. From behind her, Kiona's voice came through the dark. "He found the right one." She looked back. He stood beyond the lantern light, carrying 2 empty buckets. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough." "That answer is getting old." "Yes." Rosemary looked at the grave again. "I wish he'd known about the map." Kiona shifted the buckets in his hand. Maybe he knew what mattered without it. She considered that, then shook her head. He would have framed the thing twice as large and bored every visitor with the story. That also sounds true. Rosemary picked up the lantern. They walked back toward the house together, the buckets knocking softly against Kiona's legs. Behind them the grave stood straight beneath the cottonwoods. Summer did not become gentle because Silas Vance lost a case. The drought continued. 2 shallow wells east of Gila Flats failed before September. The public trough became busier. Teamsters stopped. Ranch families came with barrels. Apache families traveling between settlements watered horses there without being questioned. So did miners, drifters, a preacher Rosemary disliked, 2 soldiers Kiona distrusted, and once a group of Vance's former ranch hands. Rosemary kept count of usage in a ledger, not names, gallons. She and Kiona measured the well depth every week. When the level dropped, they reduced pasture irrigation. When travelers arrived in numbers, they filled at cooler hours. Rosemary learned quickly that generosity without attention could become another kind of waste. Kiona never lectured. He would stand beside the measuring rope, show her the wet mark, and wait. She came to dislike his waiting almost as much as she valued it. In October, clouds gathered over the mountains. The first storm did not reach them. The second dropped 6 minutes of rain and left. The third arrived at night. Rosemary woke to a sound she did not recognize at first. Then she sat up. Rain, hard against the roof. She ran barefoot to the porch. Kiona was already outside. The yard smelled transformed. Creosote opened sharp and green. Dust became mud. Water poured from the eaves into barrels that had stood empty only weeks before. Rosemary stepped into the rain fully dressed in her nightshirt. Kiona looked at her. "You will be cold. I've been hot since May. That does not make cold harmless. Go inside if you're worried." He stayed where he was. Rain ran down his face. Rosemary laughed. The horses moved restlessly in the corral, surprised by the noise. The public trough overflowed. For 20 minutes, the Gila Valley sounded like a different world. Then the storm moved east. The silence afterward was filled with dripping. Rosemary stood beneath the porch roof, soaked and shivering. Kiona handed her a blanket. She accepted it. Across the yard, the old rosebush bent under the weight of water. Most of its branches were dead. One small section near the root was green. Rosemary noticed it the next morning. She did not make a ceremony of it. She trimmed away the dead wood. Weeks later, a new shoot appeared. Life on the ranch settled into work. Fence repair, feed, accounts, a roof leak over the pantry, a lame steer, a broken wagon axle. Nothing about survival became romantic, simply because the villain had been removed from the immediate picture. Rosemary preferred it that way. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Tucson. Vance had been convicted on lesser charges than Stone originally expected, but enough to cost him a year in custody, significant fines, and several disputed contracts. More important to the valley, the Territorial Land Office had ordered review of water right filings connected to his association. Rosemary read the letter once, then used the back of the envelope to write a list of supplies. Kiona watched her. "That is all? What do you want me to do?" "Nothing." "Good," she added lamp oil to the list. "I spent enough days thinking about Silas Vance. You remember where he stood?" Rosemary looked at him. He remembered what she had said on the porch the day Vance first offered to buy her out. "Yes, and I remember where everyone stood." Kiona nodded. She folded the supply list. "But I don't plan to live there." Outside, a wagon stopped at the public trough. A child jumped down and ran toward the water with a tin cup. Her mother called for her to slow down. The girl ignored her. Rosemary heard the splash, then the child's delighted shout at how cold the water was. She went to the window. The Spanish map hung beside her, dark lines on old vellum. For months she had thought the map saved the ranch. That was true, but incomplete. The map gave the law something it could recognize. Kiona's memory had given the map meaning. Stone's authority had given it force. Bart's betrayal of Vance had exposed the scheme. The neighbors' later choices would decide whether the valley learned anything from it. And Rosemary's own stubbornness had kept her alive long enough for all of those things to matter. No one piece had been enough. That pleased her. She had grown tired of stories in which one paper, one gun, one man, or one miracle fixed everything. Real survival looked more like the workbench in the barn. A dozen tools, some old, some borrowed, most imperfect, used together. That evening she walked to the well. The sun had dropped behind White Peak. The water level was good. Kiona stood at the edge of the cottonwoods. Rosemary joined him. For a while they watched swallows skim the trough. "You ever miss leaving?" she asked. "Yes." She looked at him. "That was quick," you asked. "Do you want to go?" Sometimes. The answer hurt more than she expected. Rosemary kept her eyes on the trough. Then you should. I know. Don't stay because of the map. I do not. Or Elias. I do not. Or because you think I'll dig a well in the wrong place without supervision. That is a concern. She gave him a look. He almost smiled. Why do you stay? She asked. Kiona picked up the gray river stone from the edge of the well curb. He had moved it there from the porch weeks earlier. He turned it in his hand. Water moves, he said. I've heard. It also returns. Rosemary waited. He looked toward the house, the barn, the public trough, and the green chute on the rosebush near the kitchen wall. This place remembers more than one kind of life now. It was the longest answer he had given her to a question that mattered. She accepted it. Night came slowly. The first stars appeared over Devil's Backbone. A breeze moved through the cottonwood leaves. For years, the sound had reminded Rosemary of Elias, because he used to sit beneath those trees after supper and say the leaves sounded like rain even when the sky was clear. Now the sound belonged to more than memory. It belonged to the present, to horses drinking, to a pump that worked, to an Apache scout who had chosen not to ride north, to travelers who could fill a canteen without asking a cattle baron's permission, to a widow who had nearly lost everything because one man believed thirst would make her cheap. Rosemary touched the iron key in her pocket. Then she took it out. She walked to the well house, opened the door, and removed the padlock from the hasp. Kiona watched. She carried the lock back to the porch and dropped it into a wooden drawer with bent nails, broken hinges, and other pieces of metal that might become useful for something else. The key she placed beside the Spanish locket. The next morning she woke before sunrise. For one confused second she listened for hammering. There was none. She heard a horse shift in the corral. A pan settle on the stove as the house cooled, wind moving across the roof. Then, from the edge of the property, came the clear splash of water into the public trough as the float valve opened. Rosemary lay still and listened. The ranch was not quiet. It had never been quiet. She had simply spent too many years mistaking the absence of one voice for emptiness. She got out of bed, dressed, and went to make coffee. Outside, Kiona was already measuring the well.